Good morning. Thanks for coming in. I'd like to kind of keep things a little bit lively, so I may be asking you some questions along the way. So first and foremost, if you look at any of the incident response reports that most vendors put out every year, it could be the Mandiant M trends, it could be CrowdStrike's, it could be the Verizon data breach report. Doesn't matter who it is. One thing kind of remains a commonality in every single one of these reports. Breaches are happening, data is being stolen, and regardless of the industry and what that industry is responsible for, every single company today is a data company. You could be selling flowers in a mom and pop shop. That customer database, data, highly valuable. So there's this weird paradigm shift, and especially from a board level, where people are slowly starting to understand that, hey, regardless of what's making me money, I'm still a data company at the end of the day. Attackers know it. If you're in cyber, you know it. And for the most part, as defenders, it's been pretty difficult in trying to keep data within the realm of the data owner, right, of that company. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the attack surface has changed over the years. Take a look at 2020, we had the pandemic. Most organizations had to very quickly figure out a way to work from home. And of course, the quickest way to do that is to enable everybody to work remotely using multi-factor authentication on their cell phones. Just out of curiosity, who's got a cell phone in the pocket right now? Right. How many of you have work email on that cell phone? How many of you access work-related applications on that cell phone? And how many of you have some kind of protection on that cell phone? Whether it's MDM, MTD, doesn't really matter. Okay, good. That's a good thing. So today we're starting to see, not just the remote work, but also as organizations are starting to modernize, mobile devices, or what I like to call modern endpoints, are really kind of becoming really important. I hate carrying around my laptop bag. It's heavy, I've got a whole bunch of junk in it. And so I can do most of my work with my cell phone. Oddly enough, when you look across industries, it doesn't matter which one, which vertical, most of the work can be done on a mobile device. Could be a tablet, could be mobile device, whatever the case is. These modern endpoints are now kind of forefront from a cyber perspective. Now, when you start to think about the kill chain, right? One of the first things that happens is recon, and I'll get into this. But now we're kind of moving into this identity crisis on a global scale. And what I mean by that is, from an attacker's perspective, it's no longer about, hey, I need access to a machine. I need access to an identity. And I don't care what's guarding that identity. It could be human, it could be a machine, whatever that case is. Getting access into those credentials is probably the most important thing. I mean, it's developed now an entire community and an entire economic group, right, of identity access brokers, where their sole job is to collect and validate credentials that can log into other environments, and then they resell it. Now, a lot of the attack surface today, right, there's a lot of, hey, I've got on-prem, maybe I'm cloud, and maybe I'm hybrid. One of the big common things is you still need to have some kind of identity in order to log in, authenticate, and then ensure that you've got the correct authorization for whatever data you're trying to access. But the tools, whether it's social media, whether it's SMS phishing, whether it's even now phone calls, whatever the case is, the tools for defense don't always make it back to that modern endpoint. And so when I talk about this identity crisis, how many of you are responsible for your organization's security? Okay. How many of you are responsible in the GRC world? Risk, compliance, auditing? Okay. So let me pose a hypothetical question. Are you able to determine whether a system trying to connect to your environment is a mobile device, a laptop, or a device that's within your enclave? That's a pretty common response. Now, the other side of this is, are you able to determine whether I'm using a laptop with a full security suite that the organization offers versus my home computer? Okay, got some. So what's kind of been interesting is, as I've been doing these talks for the last year and change, there are a lot of organizations that struggle with a couple of things. One, what's connecting in? And then two, what data do I have? What's considered sensitive? What am I supposed to protect? Now, in regulated industries, this is a little easier because you're held to various laws and regulations. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that you may not have been thinking about. One of the things I'm going to talk about, and I hope for the folks who are responsible for GRC, I hope one of the things that you take back today is you go and you take a look at your business impact analysis as well as your continuity plans. And we'll discuss why in a little bit. But one thing I ask you to do. So when we take a look at the kill chain today, well, before I get into that, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I get into the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers and how I'm getting a lot of this data. So if you're not familiar with Lookout, we started mobile security space back in 2007. We've got quite a bit of data. So we've got about 220 million devices that are providing some telemetry data for us. Basically means I have a lot of data I get to sift through to go and find evil, intent, and a lot of really kind of other interesting data aspects. The other piece is we've done the analysis, and this number's already outdated. We literally go through millions of apps. But we've done the reverse engineering of over 355 million mobile apps. Yes, there are that many. When you start to take a look at the amount of apps that are combined between Apple, Google, third-party app stores, custom developed apps, there's a lot that are out there. And so a lot of this analysis that we've done, some is kind of automatic. We do a lot of static and dynamic analysis, but there's also a lot of manual process, especially around iOS. And the last thing is, when we take a look at various different websites, we've categorized around 472 million websites. And a lot of this has to do with, are they legitimate? Is there phishing? Is there a drive-by malware website? Are they using certs that have been compromised? There's a lot of research that goes into this. All right, so when we talk about the modern kill chain here, everyone's probably seen this, right? Lockheed Martin put this together a couple years ago. When I used to work at FireEye Ambient, our team's probably arguably the best in the world from an offensive capability. We could break into an environment, go undetected, have complete unfettered access in 3 days. Today, attackers are doing this in under an hour. The kill chain today, we're not altering it, we're not changing it, but what we are going to be talking about is how the modernization of technology, resources, and people are now helping make this a faster time to getting access into target environments, getting access for data exfiltration, and really kind of what that looks like. So let's dive into recon here. So from a recon perspective, there has been a lot of data that's been released over the years. Not everything you have to go and collect that's going to be something new, right? And especially for a lot of folks who are doing password reuse, who are utilizing already compromised accounts, there's a lot of data that I can just go out, Google, and harvest on my own. Now, when we start to take a look at how other ways to target individuals, the rise of social media, it's never been easier to target an individual. In fact, we as humans love putting out all of the most valuable information for everyone to see. Whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I don't know some of the newer ones that are out there, but we just love being able to put out that information. It got so bad that right around 2008 timeframe roughly, Meta started stripping all of the metadata in photos. because people didn't realize that a lot of the data that was contained in those photos were things like geolocation information. So at any given time, if you posted a photo and you didn't lock down your profile, knew exactly where you were. So there's a lot of things that just kind of came about from a recon perspective that made it far easier to target individuals. Now, of course, social engineering, we know social engineering's been around for a long time. Phishing is still probably one of the top issues today. Human behavior is something that is really, really difficult to change, alter, and ultimately defend against. But what's kind of been interesting, just being here at Lookout, so I've started to see a couple different things. So first, we get to see these mass SMS messages that go out. This is pretty open targeting. Really generic, really simple, but everybody gets these messages. In most cases, and I do say most because we do find some that people still click on stuff, most of the time you can determine, hey, you know what? This is illegitimate. I don't even want to look at it. I don't want to respond to it. However, when you start to get some of the more targeted, these are a little bit more meaningful for you. They sound a little bit more legitimate. It's not the, hey, your UPS package has been redelivered. Please click here to reschedule, right? The one thing I will caution just everybody here today, if you ever get a text message, don't interact with it. I know there's a lot of people who get their kicks off of, going down the rabbit hole, trying to figure out what these people's goals are. Do yourself the biggest favor, don't interact. If you get a text message and you think it's malicious, don't respond. Don't ask for gift cards to go get gas like I do. There is a whole bunch of reasons why you don't want to do this. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. What's really cool to see though, is when we do this research, and when we take a look at the attack infrastructure and what this looks like, these guys have a full suite of tools that are dirt cheap. For less than $500, you can go get an SMS phishing kit. And on the fly, you can change, just like a web page, what that phishing kit's going to look like. I can make it look like your Okta page. I can go and make it look like your Office 365 account login. And I can do this within 1 second, 2 seconds. All I need is your company logo. And so for me, as an attacker, this enables me to very quickly change and alter that entire package. In fact, if you start interacting from a text message perspective, and I start getting the text inside my console, I can type right back to you, and I can change everything based on what you're telling me. So it's just another reason why you shouldn't interact with any of these text messages. Here's the thing I don't like, and this is what I was talking about for the GRC folks. If anything, go take a look at your business impact analysis, go take a look at your incident response plan, continuity plans. Starting to see a rise of violence. Now, Brian Krebs has been talking about violence as a service and posting it on his blog site for a long time. If you don't know Brian Krebs, he used to work for the Washington Post. He got skimmed on his credit card, and he got really angry about it, and he kind of dedicated all of his life now to basically going out and researching security issues. Violence as a service is something that's really starting to climb since 2020. It's hard to put a number to this because as you start to get victim data of violence as a service, typically results in FBI or some kind of law indictment, right? That makes it difficult to get victims and start to talk about these things. However, when you start to see the amount of reporters that are starting to talk about this, the amount of security research that start to talk about this is where things are taking a little bit darker, a darker turn. Mob mentality has come back. And we are now starting to see where, from a social engineering perspective, why would I go out and spend, I'll say, somewhere in the realm between $1 and $5 million for a full exploit chain to go and attack a mobile device, when I can just say, hey, I know where you live. I've gotten your information off of either social media, past breaches, whatever. Maybe you just love posting where you live on social media. But I have enough information to where I now know where you live, give it to me or else, right? And depending on who you are and what your own risk profile is, not just that of the company that you work for, but your own personal risk profile, You may say, hey, it's not worth it, right? Here's my username and password, here's whatever you need, right? So just an example. A couple text messages that we've seen over the years where life is absolutely getting threatened. Those the family members are getting threatened, and this is now starting to rise. I'm not going to say commonality, but it's starting to be a problem. And most boards are not prepared to have a response plan when an employee is threatened like this, especially from a business impact analysis perspective. Do you have the people that are in place to protect that individual? What's the cost associated with it? There's no avoidance and there's no risk mitigation factor for that either. So let's talk about initial access. So a couple things that I used to love, just being on the red team side, is the amount of username, passwords, location information people love to talk about in Slack. Doesn't have to be Slack, could be Teams, could be whatever your collaboration tool is. A lot of people love putting that information out there, and it makes it really super simple for us. And so from an attacker perspective, it's a gold mine, so I wouldn't do it. If you do have it, hopefully it's not, it hasn't been backed up and it hasn't been logged, but you should probably remove it if you do. So a lot of the time, when we start talking about, let's just talk about MFA for a moment. MFA has kind of two problems today. One, the identity issue. I'll dive into that here in a second. But the second is SIM swapping. Now, unfortunately today, Lookout doesn't have an ability to stop SIM swapping. That's more of a carrier thing. Carriers need to kind of step it up in terms of what they do to protect device to SIM card partnership. If somebody SIM swaps, you can't detect it. All you know is you've got suddenly a new device that has received your MFA token. And if you are logging in or you're talking to somebody over the phone who's asking to log in because they may be saying that they're from the help desk, that could be seriously problematic. As we start to see a lot of these now English-speaking threat actors that are starting to come about, especially on the cybercrime world, this is becoming a big problem. We got to see that with Scattered Spider and MGM, was it, 2 years ago now, where the person on the other end of the phone seriously thought they were talking to their help desk, and it caused a massive outage. We're also seeing this with other threat groups, Alpha V, I should say, the ransomware group, has also started going through this chain. There's a couple of other threat groups that we're tracking behind the scenes that are doing the same thing. One of the other groups, Crypto Chameleon, is a group that we started to track earlier this year, are also offering kind of the same service. From an identity perspective, again, kind of more posing a question to you guys, worst case scenario, I'm getting you to think about something differently. How many of you have an analytic rule that says an employee can only have one mobile device tied to your MFA? You should probably go get that in place now if you don't have it. When I was at Fire Mandate, one of the things that we dealt with was SolarWinds. When we initially got attacked, we didn't have a log, we didn't have an alert, nothing fired on, for us to say, hey, you've been breached. What we did get was an analytical log that stated, hey, somebody's got 2 cell phones that are connected to the account. That's bad. And that's what got us looking, outside of obviously our tools suddenly ending up in the hands of somebody and news being reported on it. But when we started to dive into it, that's honestly what kind of started poking us into the right direction and following the trail. All right, so the last thing I'll just talk about here, the console for these kits. I have an ability using some of these phishing kits, not all of them have this capability, but I can alter the logins. So if you're landing on my site and you're putting in your username and password, I have the ability to fire off that token onto your device. So now you're expecting it because you're logging into my website, and you think by logging into my website, you're going to get that token. Once I see you enter the username and password, I see it, I'm going to hit the MFA token, but I'm actually logging in as you at that point, and you're going to authorize that MFA token my login, not your own. So what's kind of been interesting is seeing, when I look at the attacker infrastructure, being able to see that in real time and how it operates in real time. That's been kind of really interesting to me, because now you're talking about the modernization of going after mobile devices. So now we're going to start talking, oops, went too far. Now we're going to start talking about data theft. Data theft has been really super interesting. A lot of organizations are really struggling, again, with really kind of detecting within their own realms what is sensitive data, and who has access to it, where does it sit, and how do they wrap controls around it. In fact, one of the bigger problems that a lot of people struggle with is if I go out and I start zipping up all your data and then download it, most organizations can't stop it. And so attackers are really kind of having a field day with that one. It's something I think a lot of folks are struggling about. The other piece, though, is when we talk about like mean time to detection, a lot of the good work by defenders, honestly has gone a long way. When I first started in security, I was over 2,000 days. Today, I think we're hovering around 12 days. And a lot of it does have to do with not just the defenders, but also the tools that go along with it. But we're talking about an hour to get to that data. 12 days is still too long, and that number is a little bit skewed because of ransomware. It's hard to not realize you've been breached when you've got a message on your screen saying, hey, go give me Bitcoin because I've locked up all your data. Now the other piece here, double extortion has been on the rise since 2017. Double extortion meaning they're going to throw ransomware on your computer because they're going to monetize their access, but then they're also going to ransom the data back to you. If you don't want it leaked, you got to pay me. Now, kind of going into the violence as a service, we're also starting to see pay me or else. Hasn't been too much, but it has been some. The last one, I'm sorry if this was you, but I still kind of chuckle at this one. But the attackers understanding regulatory requirements. If you get breached, do you have to file an SEC report? And if you don't, the ransom is, well, if you don't pay me, I'm going to go file it on your behalf. And it's exactly what happened, was it last year? I did find that kind of amusing. But the downside is, now you've got attackers who are looking at regulatory requirements. You now have attackers looking at insurance policies because they know that they can get you for exactly what that policy states. And as we've seen, especially recently in the news, even this week, somebody did pay that because it was what their insurance payout was, and yet they still didn't get their data back. Now I can't tell you one way or another, should you pay ransom or not. You should definitely be talking to lawyers and your board about that. And if anybody ever tries to tell you otherwise, ignore it. Always go to the board, always go to your legal counsel to figure that out. But, because there's always a chance they don't give you your data, there's always a chance they still leak it. But it's definitely something that needs to be raised as kind of concern. A lot of, again, going back to that business impact analysis, a lot of people haven't really kind of figured this one out. How many times are you going to get hit? How many times are you going to get ransomed? And what happens when you do pay or you don't pay? That's a really hard one to quantify. So the last kind of thought I'm going to leave you here with, just kind of wrapping this up here. Some of the things that we start to see today from a mobile perspective. A lot of folks are saying, hey, I've got an MDM. Right? I'm secure. The problem with this approach is kind of a false sense of security. Where an MDM, you may say, hey, thou shalt not download from third-party sites. Cool, I get it. Thou shalt not download apps that I don't have on my allow list. The problem is, once you have that policy in place, who's doing the research on if that app that is in your allow list has not been acquired or purchased by a threat actor? What about the SDK that got utilized in order to develop the app? What about some of the libraries that it may be using? Is anybody actually doing the research on those libraries itself within those apps? One of the big common things that we start to see as we do the reverse engineering of these apps is attackers have kind of figured that out. And they have started doing exactly that, weaponizing libraries that are used by legitimate apps, buying legitimate SDKs. I mean, you got to think about it. If you're 22 years old, you develop an app, you're selling it for $2.99 on an app store, right? And it's got a great business use case. So you buy the app, right? What happens when they sell it? Because all of a sudden, $250K is a lot more than $2.99. And that kind of puts a little wrench into the whole idea of I'm only going to allow apps that I say are good. The other thing that we start to see too, and we see this especially in the financial world, banking apps, a lot of shortcut development, agile techniques, use a lot of rebuilt code, the whole library problem. And that just introduced even more risk when those libraries do become weaponized. The last thing I'll just kind of talk about here is, from a mobile standpoint, MDMs kind of have a hole in a couple different other areas. Remote jailbreaks. There's not a single MDM on this planet today that's able to do zero-day protections from vulnerabilities. If I send you a text message that executes a zero-day, think along the lines of commercialware, or I should say commercial surveillanceware. No MDM is going to stop that. So what's the, kind of the backup plan there? And that's kind of where MTD becomes important from a greater scale of things. But this is just kind of some of the commonalities that we see. The last thing I'll leave you with is the fact that I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today to tell you mobile devices are now starting to become the #1 way of getting into organizations. And it's twofold. It's the identity that I keep talking about. You've got a treasure trove on that mobile device. Social media accounts, contacts, you've got your MFA token, you've got your credentials, or some kind of credential authorization on that device, whether it's through email or work apps or whatever it is. And if I get access to your device and I start resending text messages with links to your contacts, I'm now a trusted identity because it's now coming from your device. It becomes a lot harder because you can't just hover over a link and say, that's bad. So with that, that's what I'm going to kind of leave you with today. Like I said, it's not all doom and gloom. From a defender standpoint, there's a lot of tools out there. Happy to have a conversation. Our booth is right outside the door if that's something you're interested in. But like I said, the last thing that I really kind of want to leave you with is if you're not protecting the data itself, right? What are you protecting as a defender? If you take zero trust methodology and you actually apply it, perimeter defenses are already broken through. You already have somebody who's hiding within your environment. Is that data able to be prevented from exfiltration? Do you have a way to encrypt that data the second it leaves your environment? Do you have a way that's tied into your identity in order to decrypt that data? More importantly, are even logging. Believe it or not, more times than I can count, I've gone into an environment, they thought they had logging enabled and they didn't. Or they thought they had packet capture capability and they don't. Or worse, they do have backups, but then they don't test it and the backups are all corrupt. But all things that you should really kind of take a look at. And again, at the end of the day, it's going to be the data itself. Yes, from a risk and compliance perspective, if your organization is, the whole reason why it exists is because you're selling, insurance. Sure, obviously you need to protect that money flow, but you also need to protect the data itself, especially if you're going to be in a regulated industry. And again, just that last thought. At the very least, do me the solid, go to protect your people. Go back, look at your business impact analysis, get the understanding of what happens when I have an employee who is getting targeted and threats of violence are going against that employee. At the very least, get the board talking about it. It's not something everybody's prepared for. I was just at a symposium last week with, I'll just say, some Fortune 50 companies, not even on the radar. maybe it's nothing, right? Maybe the slim chance of it happening. Worst case scenario, you have a plan that's in place if it ever happens. So with that, open up for any questions, but appreciate your time.